You will.
Yeah.
Okay, hello, welcome. Thank you for coming. I know today is a big Sunday at the chapel, so I appreciate you coming here. If you want to leave early, I know like Tamla has to go serve communion, so if you leave a little early, we get it. This is my dad. He is Don Courtney. He graduated from every North Carolinian's favorite school, the University of Kansas, medical school in 1982. He did a residency in internal medicine and then a fellowship in geriatric medicine. Then he returned to Kansas, where he led the geriatric medicine program at the VA Medical Center in Leavenworth, where he was academically affiliated with the University of Kansas. He provided patient care, taught over 1,000 medical students, residents, and fellows, and was the site investigator in several health services. I'm going to skip over the rest of that. In 2017, he started the Geriatric Consulting Service at the University of Oklahoma Hospital, where he developed protocols for assisting the elderly who had been hospitalized after major trauma. At some point, you should get him to tell you the story of when there were 3 bird feeder related incidents in one day. In 2020, he moved to the Myrtle Beach area, starting the Geriatric Consulting Service at Grants General Medical Center, and he started the fellowship program in palliative medicine, in which he served as the program director until his retirement in June 2025. I was there. He said for over 30 years that his best moments were the times when he had an interesting patient in front of him and an interested trainee beside him. So I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you for that introduction. It's always nice when your children realize you actually did something in their life. And I appreciate that. We're going to talk about death today. And we're going to talk about what we can and can't do to try to plan for the incredibly variable thing that happened. It'll be uncomfortable, so we're going to start out with a few things. First of all, the idea of the bucket list has been popular for at least 20 years. The things that I want to get done before I die. And for at least the last 10 years, as I've interacted with our palliative medicine fellows and med students at the right time and so on, I've said, on my bucket list, I don't have a lot at the top of it, but the very last thing I want is to have a peaceful, comfortable death. Ideally with some meaningful time around the people that matter the most to me. And everybody thought, well, that's a really good idea. I'd never thought of having something like that on my bucket list. So I would encourage you to think about that and add some things to the top. The most famous bucket list I'm aware of is the one on the right. That's Austin Powers' bucket list, which includes catching Dr. Evil in the first act, a threesome with Japanese twins, and let's see, and earning Daddy's respect. Those are those. I had my dad's respect. He's passed. The other 2 are not on my list. I just wanted to make that clear before my wife had an issue with me. Well, we are not comfortable talking about death. Is anybody here really comfortable saying, hey, let's talk about the fact you're going to die next 20 years? Today, don't be afraid to speak up. I've gone through this slide set a few times, and I'd much rather have a dialogue than a monologue. So ask questions, offer your opinions. If you're out there on pay-per-view on Zoom and you have a question, please, you can put that in. You can type that in if you need to. You not just ask questions, you can offer your opinions as you need to. Let's see, how do I get that to start? Oh, that didn't do it. Next thing. If I push the next button, thank you.
I saw a study that said speaking in front of a crowd is considered the #1 fear of the average person. I found that amazing. Number 2 was death. Death is number 2? This means to the average person, if you have to be at a funeral, you would rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy.
I just wanted to offer that observation. You'd rather be in the casket than doing the eulogy if you're at a funeral. Let's do that. One last comment before we get started to get the mood lighthearted so we're ready to talk about anything. As I thought back, the oddest question I've ever got is when I was in there pronouncing a patient was the family saying as I got ready to leave, aren't you going to put pennies on his eyes? You were a physician, ever have to put pennies on the eyes?
Oh, why?
Why? Thank you for asking. The ancient Greeks felt that the land of the living was separated from the underworld, and when you died, you had to go from the land of the living to the underworld. You traveled there by boat. Between them was two rivers, the water river, the river Styx, and the river of fire, the Acheron. They divided the souls of the living from the deceased. You needed to cross by boat. The ferryman of Hades was Charon, and if I'm pronouncing my Greek wrong, I apologize. Coins were placed on the eyes or in the mouth of the deceased to pay that toll. Charon didn't carry the passengers back and forth for free. According to Greek legend, he needed to be paid an obol for his service. Still, the only way to make sure he got his payment was to bury the dead with a coin either on their eyes or even in their mouths. Suddenly, grave robbers all over Europe, especially Southern Europe, makes sense. I mean, raiding King Tut's tomb, there would be jewels and stuff, but an ordinary common gravesite? No, but there were coins in the mouths of all these people. This legend made sense until the 1800s, and intellectuals and philosophers said, wait a minute, this guy's job all day, every day is taking this boat back and forth across the river. He doesn't have a retirement plan. There's no shopping center around. What does he need the money for? And it wasn't until the 1970s that we got the answer. It's hard work getting that boat back and forth. There's a soda machine at the end of the dock, but it only takes exact change. And that's why you had to pay the ferryman to get back and forth across the river. Okay? In the Victorian era, they often had open casket wakes, and the eyes tend to sink in as the body dehydrates them. So they would put coins over the eyes because that was very exciting. So I'll just say that there's other reasons why, but the historical one goes all the way back to the Greek world. Well, I'm not saying that's the end of the frivolity, but I wanted to sort of start by getting us all comfortable with the idea. There's some interesting things, and it doesn't have to be all gloom and doom, but there will be some of that. We're going to ask 6 questions today, unless you ask a lot of other questions and I don't have time to get through, and then maybe I have to come back. But we'll start with, hey, what do I want my death to be like? What does my family want my death to be like? Are they discordant? And if we have some disagreements, who makes those decisions? Are there circumstances where I'd really rather not be kept alive? How do I communicate that to my loved ones? And what are some limits I want to put on life-prolonging treatments? I will just go ahead and say as a disclaimer right now, I am not going to advocate for euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide or any of those things. I've been very uncomfortable with that as it has come up, and that would take way, way, way too long for what we have now. So let's just start with number 1. What do I want my death to be like? In our fellowship program, I would always have the fellows, the start of the year, draw what they wanted their final scene to look like. Where do you want to be when you die? What's it look like? And it's fascinating what they come up with. Nobody draws an ICU with more tubes going into their body than they have natural orifices. Nobody has that. It's home. It's in the forest. One person put it in outer space, which I thought was particularly cool. And apparently Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are working on ways to do that. Mine's got the bedroom in our home. We were so lucky when we moved to Myrtle Beach, the way the market was. We ended up buying a condo on the water where we were going to stay for a couple of years till we found a good neighborhood. And as the end of those 2 years approached, we said, we didn't realize how much we hated yard work. And so we are staying there. So I'm there. The dog is in the bed with me. My wife is next to it. She's got too many errands. She's not going to be there providing comfort. If there's company coming to visit me, she's going to be too busy. There's some pill bottles to make sure my pain and other symptoms are controlled. Sometimes I've drawn it with an IV infusion, giving me whatever I need for the pain, but normally it's just pills. And the hospice paperwork is there to say that would be a pretty good way to pass on to the next world. Does anybody know who this man is? I'm sorry?
Will Rogers.
Will Rogers is correct back there. Way to go, Greg. Greg, an American humorist of the early 20th century, referred to himself as the cowboy philosopher. And it turns out this quote, which I've seen in different settings, goes all the way back to him. When I die, I want to die like my grandfather, who died peacefully in his sleep, not screaming like all the passengers in his car. If we think any about how we want to die, we would like to just fall asleep and not wake up. And that happens sometimes. There are good deaths out there. And as someone who's seen a lot of death, there are bad deaths out there as well. What I intend to do over this time is to, as we go through this at a pace faster than I'd like, say, how do we make sure we have the best death we can under our circumstances? Okay? What does my family want my death to be like? How many times have you heard the saying, oh, somebody died there, that's why they can't sell the house? Or, dad died and now, we've got to change the mattress or the sheets and, nobody wants to sleep in that bedroom anymore and all that. Some of these weird things that come up, which 150 years ago was never a concern. Almost everybody died at home back in those days. But it became kind of the thing where for a while, half of all deaths were in hospitals. That number's gone down now, and it'll be more important later in the talk. But I'm going to go ahead and say it now because I'm on the subject. About a third of people in the United States right now die at home. About a third die in hospitals. And the other third die in a combination of, number one, nursing homes, number two, assisted living facilities, three, inpatient hospice, or four, at the scene of the car wreck or whatever, where their accidental deaths tend to fall into that. So there's about a 1 in 3 chance that you'll die at home with some control over the circumstances. You also, as you think about it, need to be thinking about, what about these other circumstances? That famous philosopher Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. For those who aren't aware, Mike Tyson was a heavyweight fighter. As we plan for how we want to die, we have to accept the fact that there's a very high likelihood that things will happen not on our schedule, not on our pace. And how do I make the best of those circumstances as well? And it gets incredibly complicated, but we'll try to make it simple and understandable. And the idea is that you come away from this and communicate to your family about your own, or you go back and talk to your parents and talk about theirs, or your brothers and sisters or whoever, and say, what do you want? What do we do? How do we make this work? So what's important for my dynamics here? My wife's got a lot of back problems. I can't expect her to do a lot of bedside care for me. That would be ridiculous for me to count on her to be a primary caregiver for me if I get old and dependent. Older, I'm already past that threshold. I've got a lot of people I've worked with, and I'd love to have them around in my final days. And I'd much rather that be in my home than at a nursing facility. Split open a bottle of wine or something like that. Our daughters found the place that's a life care facility here in Durham that she would like. I'd hate for my wife to have to leave our home to be near me, but that might be the best alternative. There's a wonderful program that you've got here in Durham and around the country called PACE. Does anybody know about PACE? A few people, thank goodness. Program for All-Inclusive Care of the Elderly. This started in the early 80s in San Francisco. The idea is people want to be in their own home, but they need more help and they don't have family around to do that for them. How can we help them out? And a PACE program, you get up in the morning and we'll just pick some times. They're arbitrary depending where you are on the pickup list. But around 6:30, the wheelchair van shows up and the man comes up to your front door. And if you need a little help to get, out to the wheelchair van, they can help you with that. You go to the PACE site. Breakfast is there for you. You have trouble dressing yourself, so they'll get you out of your jammies into your regular clothes, and 3 days a week they'll bathe you, more if you need it. But you'll get your bathing, you'll get your clothes changed. There'll be activities there. They're typically held, both of the PACE sites are also on the same campus as a nursing home or both. You'll get lunch. There is a physician or a nurse there most every day to take care of any medical issues that pop up. Again, because it's a nursing facility as well. You'll either get supper before you leave and a snack because not everybody's done eating at 5 o'clock, or they'll give you a box supper to take home with you. They'll get you home again in your jammies if you have to. And as long as you've got the ability to get back and forth to the bathroom in your own home, you can stay there. In many places, it's 7 days a week, but not all. And the people that get involved with PACE sites love them. When I was at the University of Oklahoma, we had one PACE site in the state, and the legislature came to us, the Department of Geriatrics, and said it costs 1/6 of a nursing home cost to have patients at a PACE site, and they love it more. You know, you've got to train people and you got to help us set them up in these zip codes. That's how the state had figured out where the concentrations of Medicaid patients needing nursing home care were. And there were 3 of them at the time. They wanted us to do what we could. Well, trying to get young doctors to go into geriatrics as a specialty or to whatever, and then go to that particular zip code I failed. But the need is there. Everybody in the room would agree the need is there. The supply is not there. So you've got one here in Durham just to do that. Well, if my family and I don't agree, yes, sir.
Might it be worth truth in advertising before everybody tries to go out and sign up for PACE tomorrow? It's easiest if you're both Medicare and Medicaid dual eligible. Else it's pretty expensive, is what I've heard.
You are right. It is kind of built to sort of absorb some of the state's Medicaid costs. Medicaid pays for nursing home once a patient's used all of their resources and they still need to be in the nursing home. So the nursing home doesn't go broke. Medicaid pays for it. And it's the biggest drain on Medicaid dollars that there is. But I should say drain, it provides value, but it's very expensive. So the help that they get from the government to create their sites, they have to prioritize the patients that are Medicaid eligible. Well, I did want to talk about, if I've got decision-making capacity and I want to stay at my home and my wife says, I just can't do it anymore, who wins? How many people are still married? Does the wife win? You know my household. I don't want to be a jerk. I don't want to alienate my caregivers. If I have an unhappy wife, I get in real problems. I have to give an aside here. I had a patient once who had very bad Parkinson's disease, the disease that slows down the body movements, amongst other things. And it also was affecting his personality. And he turned into a real, and I use this in a medical sense, bastard. And he would try to hit his wife when he got mad. And he would get mad often.
Oh.
And she discovered if she didn't give him his Parkinson's medicines, he couldn't hit her.
Oh.
He was too slow to do it. And somehow social work got involved and said, this is elder abuse. You're not giving him the medicines that make him move better. And she said, I can't care for him at home if I do that. I'll let you figure out that dilemma some other time. I just don't want to alienate my caregivers. So this has to become a shared decision-making process. And it needs to be. I've told my wife, I will never ask you to promise not to put me in a nursing home. And if you ask me to never put you in a nursing home, I will say no, because there's a couple of circumstances and you all want specifics as you're thinking about yourself. I'll give you mine too. If my wife is doubly incontinent, bowel and bladder, and I can't keep my home smelling good, I don't want to keep caring for her under that circumstance. And if she develops a personality problem where I don't feel safe or I don't want to keep her in my home with that. And having trained in geriatrics, I'm pretty sure I can fix both of those. I've got a lot more wiggle room. I'm not sure how much she can help me if I get that. So I'll have to keep training the next generation of doctors to help her. And if we need more help, there are things out there like hospice, like palliative medicine, and we'll talk about that with this slide. When we say the word hospice in the United States, we're referring to a specific Medicare benefit. In the rest of the world, hospice and palliative medicine seem to overlap. And when we say palliative medicine in the United States, we're saying, well, we're going to be focused on easing your symptoms, but we're not saying you have to be dead in 6 months. And so palliative care has become a very important and powerful thing for people because in hospice, for example, you're expected to give up on life-prolonging treatments. So you stop your chemotherapy for your cancer. Well, if you're having a lot of symptoms, palliative care can be a great help for that. But in the United States, outpatient hospice, Medicare pays for. They provide services to help pay for patients in their own home. And I've listed them on this slide. And the slides are all out there available. So if you're internet savvy, you can download all of them. I've not tried to protect them. So you can get all of that and look this up at your leisure. Inpatient hospice care. Boy, I would love to get mom into someplace on the hospice benefit. There's 3 circumstances. What's called general inpatient hospice for complex symptom management. You're at home, you're on hospice, and you're having a pain crisis or an acute delirium and nobody can manage you. And you can go into a hospital and to a GIP bed and they can manage that there. But then you're discharged. So it's 2 or 3 days to acutely tuck in the symptoms. There are people who need hospice care but just don't have the resources family-wise, but they've got the money, and then private pay, they can pay for hospice. And there's a hospice house in our town that's got 32 beds, and roughly 2/3 of those are people who have been staying there for months and months and months, with the family paying essentially nursing home rates and some in order to get them hospice care. And then there are times when the caregiver breaks her leg or his leg, or, has to go on the church trip, because they promised that they will do that. And they need someone to care for a week. And that's typically private pay. And I'm sorry if that's not enough information, but I have other things I wanted to talk about. So we're going to move on. Are there circumstances where I'd rather not be kept alive? Yeah. We're going to start with a lesson. A guy named Robert Katz created years ago a list of the things you have to be able to do on your own if you want to live independently. He described the 6 activities of daily living. You gotta be able to feed yourself. You gotta be able to dress yourself. You gotta be able to get to the bathroom, those sorts of things. And fairly early in my training, I heard Tom Yoshikawa give his sort of spin on it, where he reordered them. And he said, having to wait for somebody else to wipe your butt is a fate worse than death. Hey, look, we have an acronym here. Dressing, eating, ambulating, a couple of T's, and bathing and hygiene. In medicine, I always loved a good acronym, something that would make a memory aid where I could remember that. And some of them are naughty. I won't share those with you. The most perfect one, there are 5 causes of an enlarged spleen. Does anybody know what those are? Not even our surgeon in the audience, not even our interest. Spleen, S-P-L-E-E-N, sequestration, proliferation, lymphoma, extramedullary erythropoiesis, and neoplasia. What a perfect, now we know where the word spleen came from, right? That person was brilliant. Okay. Those are the 6. Typically, the last one we lose is the ability to feed ourselves. I've seen so many loving couples where one feeds the other at the final stages. It's touching the way people do that. I don't think my wife could help me with toileting, with her back issues, etc. And thankfully with bathing, that's the easiest one to get help for, because you don't need bathing every day. We can get somebody in for home health aide to do that a few times a week, and that usually. This is a complicated slide. We've mentioned 1/3 of the time people die in hospitals. One of the worst ways, the most unpersonal ways to die is in an expensive care unit. This is this was a whole page, and I'm sorry that as we've reduced it down to a slide here, I can't read it from 4 feet away. I don't expect you to read this, and the reference is over there on the side if you want to pull it up at some time because you haven't read the New England Journal often enough. The swimsuit issue, by the way, is not worth it in the New England Journal. But we've got here in a pictographic sort of way, we've got the orange patient in the ICU, the family, the husband, the children, the grandparents, all at the side, and then all the healthcare workers. And then the post-ICU care continuum, something we've not talked about nearly enough in healthcare. What happens to graduates of the ICU and what do they go through? And they show this woman here who's survived the ICU and is at home, and the kids are getting kind of bored because mom doesn't help out and interact all that much. And they describe in broad areas physical sequelae and mood disorders. And then they also talk about the issues that the healthcare workers go through. And just as a quick comment in passing, so many of us were absolutely ravaged by the COVID pandemic and saw so many good people. A, I saw healthcare workers get sick and die because they caught the disease, but B, so many of them changed and retired early. And 5 years later, I still see some of those patients late at night, and it had a role in my retiring when I did, I think. Well, let's talk about Duke. We haven't done that lately. This is a study from the from Duke University, Duke Hospital. Just almost see it from here, can't you? Almost. At Duke Hospital, this study published in Annals of Internal Medicine 16 years ago. For a year, they collected information on everybody who had graduated from their ICU after having been on a ventilator for at least 4 days and gotten the tube to ventilate them, tracheostomy, or someone who was in the, who kept saying, no, don't do the tracheostomy. Family said it, they couldn't talk with the tube in their throat. And they never got that, and they were on the ventilator for at least 21 days, just a few of those. Most everybody got put on had the tracheostomy done. So 126 patients. And they said, we want to see what happens to people who are that sick and in the ICU that long. What happens to them? So they questioned them in the hospital. They followed up 3 months later. They followed up a year later. Did you survive? How independent were you? Where were you? Etc. They described outcomes as good if you were alive and completely independent in your ability to dress, feed, ambulate, toilet transfer, and do your hygiene. Those patients averaged 51 years of age, and 11 out of the 126, so less than 10%, a year later were independent. Being hospitalized for at least 4 days on a ventilator and getting a trach and all that has a bad prognosis for a really successful outcome. But it's not 100%. And so many people are saying, well, I've said in my living will, if I get to a point where my future is hopeless, turn the machine off. 33 patients had a fair outcome. A year later, they were dependent in 1 to 5, and poor were either dead or completely dependent on all 6 ADLs. I'll let you decide whether dependence on all 6 is a fate worse than death or not. But they did that. And that's not very encouraging news. This is the slide from that talk coming up that really had me going, ick. We start at the top, 126 patients in the hospital at Duke. 1 is still there a year later. 3 transferred to inpatient hospice. They died, but those don't count as hospital deaths. Interesting accounting system. 23 died in a hospital bed. So that leaves 99 that left Duke. 3 went to another hospital. Duke wasn't good enough for them, I guess. 36 went to an LTAC, a long-term acute care facility. 17 went to a skilled nursing facility. 23 went to an inpatient rehab facility. And 20 went home. How many here know what an LTAC is? Long-term acute care. They're a step above a rehab center or a nursing home. They're really quite expensive to go to. The 2 top reasons why people go to an LTAC are, number 1, really extensive wounds or pressure sores that require at least an hour a day of skilled RN care for them. And number 2, prolonged ventilator care. They go to an LTAC on a ventilator. So those are the top two reasons, and wound care far overwhelms the ventilator piece of it. These were all people who had been on a ventilator a long time at Duke as the entry point. I'm going to say most of them probably were still on that when they went there. But here's where it gets complicated. Let's say, hey, the most common site to go was the LTAC. And then from there, 13 of them went to a skilled nursing facility. 8 of them went home. Let's see, 12 went to a hospital again. They bounce around a whole lot. I'm sorry?
Only 8 went home.
Well, from the LTAC, only 8 went home. Some of them would have gone to a skilled nursing facility, and then from there, they might have gone home. But you're going to have to pay attention while I do the math. The numbers you see in parentheses here after they describe the facility are how many people were there at any point during the stay. So 126 start at the hospital, 99 leave. Of those 99 who leave, we've got 3 in the hospital, 43 go to or spend some time in an LTAC. That's 46. They spend some time in a skilled nursing facility. 46 plus 63 is 109. They spend some time in an inpatient rehab facility. 109 plus 54 is 163. Some time at home, 136, that's 299. And then down here, they get readmitted to a hospital, maybe Duke someplace else, 150. We're at 449 admissions for those 99 patients. Holy cow, these people bounce around a lot. There's a couple of doctors in the audience here. I won't point them out, but don't you just hate it when you've got a 20-minute slot for a patient you haven't seen for a year and they come in with their family and 2 bags of medicines and several CDs or DVDs of imaging scans and several discharge summaries, and they've got like 4 pages of questions like, how come they're taking Seroquel? What does that do for them? And you're looking at that and going, I can't do this in 20 minutes. What on earth can I do here to figure out what I can do to help this patient? What a mess this is. The average patient, I don't show this slide in this set, I share it with doctors, but the average patient in this spent over $300,000 on their health care, including the initial hospitalization, we have to add. Out of that $300-some thousand, less than 1,000 was spent on outpatient visits. These people end up spending so much time inpatient somewhere. And again, you say to yourself, is it worth it? If that's my starting point, do I say, hey, if I'm on a ventilator for 4 days and they want to do a tracheostomy, do I just say, no, turn it off? No, because there's some excellent outcomes in there. How do we decide where the line is? And that's personal. I will give you some thoughts at the end. I'll give you my ideas, but we're building to that. This is a different article about long-term acute care published before that. This is a survey of 8,000 patients over the years who had gone to an LTAC from a hospital and they were Medicare beneficiaries. So they're almost all over 65 with those exceptions of dialysis patients and other very bad chronic illness. But they've gone to an LTAC, and it's called the flame chart because so many of the colors are flame colored. Black is death. Once you go to death, you don't go to someplace else. And so the first thing you notice is that over the course of a year, about 60% of them have died. So if you get sent from a hospital to an LTAC, that's a sign that your days may be numbered. I put into that black area some quick thoughts from data. The average time that you were alive in an inpatient was 2/3 of the life you had remaining or of that year. 37% of patients spent all their time as an inpatient up till death. On average, if you went to an LTAC, you would spend 54 days at home in the next year. About 16% enrolled in hospice, and the average days in hospice is 10. And I think most people know where you get discharged to when you leave hospice. That's pretty grim, isn't it? Some of the neatest doctors I know are doctors that work in LTACs. There was a fascinating article in the New England Journal a few years ago, a very obscure article about the best way to tell when somebody is ready to have their trach button. Once you take the tracheostomy out, they use a little thing to cover the hole in to make it easier to breathe and talk. When is it safe to take that out? And the data came from an LTAC, and the editorial that came with it was by an intensivist at Harvard who said, our group spends, this many weeks covering the ICU, and then we spend a week covering the LTAC. And in the ICU, it's all evidence-based medicine, and in the LTAC, it's kind of like, oh no, I think they're ready. And isn't it great to have data driving, some of these decisions that go there? This is not meant as a slam on LTACs. It's just the hard reality that people don't do this. In that article, they pointed out that only 2% of patients had a palliative care referral in the hospital before they went to the LTAC. And we discussed with our case management system at our hospital whether we wanted to have all of those patients' families talk with us when the hospital was starting to look at transferring them to an LTAC. And it got long and complicated, and we didn't get the answer we wanted. I have one last thing to show you because I love to find the hidden gems in studies like this. And I apologize because I want to just point at the slide, but so many people are watching on Zoom that you'd miss out on that. So we'll look at the line up and down there that says 3 months out. And we'll just agree that 3 months is 90 days. Divide that line in half. So now half the way to the 3-month line would be 45 days. Divide that in half again, a quarter of the way to that 3-month line. For the people right here, that'd be about here. Half of 44 days, we'll call it 21, 22 days. 21 days, conveniently enough, was what Medicare used to pay for your stay in an LTAC. After that, the family was on the hook for $160 a day, $1,000 a week, we'll call it. And after 90 days, the family was on the hook for the couple of $1,000s a day it cost to stay at the LTAC. How many orange lines do you see after 21 days? Not that many, just a few. People go to LTACs and people think, well, they go there to be kept alive on a ventilator for a long period of time. The crew there work very hard to get people off the ventilators and there's this huge push to move them towards hospice if that doesn't work at around that 21-day point, to try to meet the needs of the family when it looks like we gave it our best shot and now we failed. I'll let you decide the particulars of where things are as we get more information. But I just wanted to show that because people go to LTACs and nobody knows what happens to them. Where I practiced at Myrtle Beach, our nearest LTACs were all the way up to Wilmington or all the way to Florence, so over 100 miles away, or over an hour away. We never saw them come back. If they went to an LTAC and they needed hospitalization again, they went to the local hospitals. And so it was a black hole. Patients go there, they don't come back. And I share this with our residents in training and our staff doctors, and they would just go, we had no idea. We just thought they went there and they stayed there forever, or they got better and went home. Oh, quick book plug. Best book I've read in the last 2 years, Wes Ely's. Every Deep Drawn Breath. Wes has been responsible for an initiative called the ABCDEF initiative now in ICUs to try to personalize, to humanize, to make care in the nursing or in the ICU better for patients and families. Boy, did COVID put a slowdown to that. But half of the ICUs in this country, over half, have adopted most of those practices. Survival rates are higher, delirium rates are lower. It's a huge benefit to do all this stuff. And he's written a book for the lay public that's not all dull, boring statistics, but it is it's personalized. He tells stories of patients that he's cared for and seen in follow-up. And I would just encourage you, if you're interested in what can happen, everyone reads Kubler-Ross's book about On Death and Dying and the 5 stages we go through. I think this is a more useful book to think about because so many people die in hospitals and after an acute illness has devastated them. So I'll just recommend that. Quick slide now, physical dependency. If we don't die in the hospital, in the ICU, what happens to us? Well, when I first started, hospice was just for cancer. And the typical patient with colon cancer is independent up until right at the end. A month before death, most colon cancer patients were still driving their car. And it's clear at the end, the wheels have fallen off. Can't take care of themselves. Their body turns orange from the liver metastases. They swell up. They've got no energy. And it's very clear they're on a dying trajectory. That's easy. I was part of a major study called the Medicaring Project. It was started by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, where we looked at people with bad heart and lung disease. And their trajectory is, well, they get better, they get worse, they get better, they get worse, they get better, they get worse, and suddenly they die. And that's kind of what their physical dependency looks like. And, a week before death, they're in the hospital and they don't look very good. And some older doctor says, yeah, but a year ago they were worse than this. They're not dying. They looked worse than that. And the support study that tried to see how good doctors were at prognosing inpatient death showed that we were pretty good with some of the cancers. We were lousy with heart disease and lung disease. Very good with AIDS, by the way, but not very good with the dementia patients. In the last 2.5 years of their life, incontinent of bowel and bladder, they are dependent on so much except for feeding until right. That's a very different burden on families, and it's almost impossible to predict when they're sick enough they're going to die. Decision-making capacity is very different. I had a patient with colon cancer once in my nursing home who said, I don't want to take my Dilaudid he was taking for his pain. I don't want to take that this afternoon at 2:00. My daughter's coming after school with the grandkids, and I wanted to talk to him one last time. Can I skip that dose? And I said, sure, I'll make a note that we can give you a double dose later on if you really get suffering by the time they leave. And he had a good interaction with them, and he was dead 2 days later. And it was like, what a way to control the final circumstances. Our patient with bad lung disease a year ago got delirious with that hospital stay where they got so bad. They never really bounced all the way back from that. And then they got delirious again. And, the times when you wanted to talk to them about what they wanted for their care, they either had a tube in their throat or they were too delirious to tell you, and they really needed to give you instructions a long time ahead of. And our patient with dementia, by the time you start thinking, I should find out what this person wants at the end of life, their ability to understand those decisions is very, very poor, very different. It's always nice when literature, what's her name? Joanne Lynn, who founded Americans for Better Care of the Dying, was the first person to start showing graphs like this, and everybody in palliative care started showing them. It's nice when the real world says, hey, you were right. This is a study from the Yale group where they looked at how do people spend the last year of their life. And so they said, we've got this longitudinal study where we ask people how independent they are, and we do other tests. But one of the things we do is every month we call them up and ask them if they had a fall, how independent are you and everything. And this is the independent side. And they said, we've got several different trajectories. So at the top, there's the person who's dependent on at least 3 of their 6 ADLs a year before death. So they're persistently severely disabled. Some people are dependent on at least 1, and they just get worse and worse. Some people spend the last 3 to 6, up until 3 to 6 months before death, they were fine, and then they got worse from that. Some people a month or 2 ahead of time, something catastrophic happens. And as someone else first described it, and I can't get that image out of my mind, someone else is perfectly healthy right until they hear the bedroom door click open. They hear someone say, what are you doing in bed with my wife? And then they hear the revolver go off. No disability at all, right to the very end. I actually, the former chair of the Center on Aging at the University of Kansas said that he had hoped his death would be at the age of 95, shot by a jealous husband. His wife said if she heard that one more time, the husband wasn't going to get the chance. Okay. Which one of those do you want for yourself? The no disability one. Most people for their family members say, I would kind of like a couple of weeks to see that things were really going poorly and I could say my goodbyes and make my amends and get used to the idea that dad or mom was dying. That's what I'd want to see. Well, someone's not going to get their way. And we'll just say that. What's interesting is when you look at the different diseases and which group they ended up in, for the cancer patients, only 4% of them were dependent in 3 or more things for a year. But for the dementia patients, it was 2/3 and another 17%, so about 85% were dependent on at least a couple, most of that last year. It's really a devastating and different disease. And we won't talk too much more about that, but it really shows how in so many ways, cancer people are really pretty good right up to the end. As bad as the disease is, it doesn't take your independence away. So explicitly, there's certain conditions where I really wouldn't want to be kept alive. If I have an advanced dementing disease and I don't get to enjoy food anymore, and I will admit I have a different standard than my wife. If I could still eat Chips Ahoy, I'd probably be okay with that. My wife has a higher standard. If I had severe behavioral problems and if I were doubly incontinent, I really wouldn't want to be kept alive like that. And again, I'm not advocating, taking me to the vet and having me put down. I'm advocating not doing a whole lot to keep me going. I don't want to get my flu shots when I get to that point. 2/3 of patients with dementia die from lower respiratory tract infections, we'll say pneumonia. If that's the way I'm going to die, most likely, I don't want to delay that at that point. So I'll stop getting my flu shots if I get demented. If I've irreversibly lost decision-making capacity from a stroke or something like that, I don't want to see where I want a lot of stuff done for me. Ventilator dependent, nope. Uncontrolled distressing symptoms. Remember, my goal is to have my symptoms well controlled right there at the end. So how do I communicate that to people? Well, the worst option is to say, oh, my family's going to know. They wouldn't want me to suffer. I don't know how to have that conversation. A living will is just barely better. Just barely, because it's going to have such vague things. And you say, in general, I don't want life-sustaining treatment. And they're going to look at that and they're going, wait a minute, in that Duke study, these people were on the ventilator for 3 weeks. And a couple of them were still home a year later. That's, and they were independent and everything. We can't say that's irreversible. So have discussions with your family and then create a durable power of attorney for healthcare where you said, if I can't make my decisions, this is the person I want to. And I've talked with them about what it is that I would want, and make sure your family all knows where to find this, because if you get admitted to the hospital, they're going to want to see that so they'll know who it is that makes the decisions. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I am going to be short on time, but you've got choices in the South Carolina or the North Carolina living will. I would encourage you again not to use this. And I'm going to say, if you do use it, make it clear that you want them to. Now, they can do it if they want to, because that then puts a load of guilt on your family. I have to push the button to say, Dad doesn't get to stay alive anymore. Say, I don't want it, period. Not, I'm telling you it's okay with me if it's okay with you. I want that. Last, there's a piece before I get on from the living will. I want to get our people fed and hydrated. I'm going to say in red, don't opt to be kept alive with IV fluids or fluids through a gastrostomy tube if there's not nutrition. First of all, the long-term consequence of that is that you end up getting malnourished and pressure sores, and it's a horrible way to go. But we learned very quickly in cancer, and it goes all the way back to the 70s and the earliest parts of the hospice movement. A dry death is better than a wet death. At the end, as the body is starting to collapse down, cells are lysing, and there's something called tumor necrosis factor, also called interleukin-2, cachexin, and leukocyte pyrogen. It's had different names depending on who was writing about it before they figured out it was all interleukin-2. And one of the things that happens as it spills out at the end is that the capillaries in your lungs get very permeable and they just leak water. And you drown in your own secretions. And the worst deaths are the suffocating deaths. I would encourage you not to ever put anybody you care for through artificial hydration if they're not getting nutrition for more than a day or two, but in the ICU. They're going to keep getting hydration, make sure they get nutrition. And to say that we're just not going to do that because it can lead to a really bad death. I really find that just having someone check, do not resuscitate on a living will, and that's all they've checked, you know. They say, I don't want to be getting on a ventilator and lingering for days or weeks, but interventions like CPR and ventilator support save lives every day. So the real need is to give those interventions a chance to succeed, then withdraw the support when it won't work. You have to talk to your family and say, give it a shot, and don't. I'm just going to skip ahead now because I'm running short on time. So I'm gonna skip to what I wanted to talk about at the end. Here. My specific instructions, if I don't have decision-making capacity and I can't safely swallow, there's only one time I'd want a feeding tube to get artificial nutrition. Brainstem strokes, I've seen in the rehab setting, people who've had brainstem strokes recover decision-making ability over the next couple of weeks, recover their ability to swallow, they enjoy food, they walk out of the rehab facility and you say, we saved one. And I want to give myself that chance. That's really the only circumstance where I would want to be artificially fed if I don't have capacity. If I have something else happen and I've lost decision-making capacity and I'm being fed, if at 30 days I still can't make my decisions or I still can't swallow safely, I want that stopped. I don't have any goal to see how long can I stay alive, not able to make my own decisions. Let's see. I'd rather be kept at home. You can send me to the hospital if I have a heart attack or, stones obstructing something, because that pain requires hospital care. We fall short managing that in the home with hospice. If I have advanced heart failure and a defibrillator implanted, turn it off if I get short of breath. I'd much rather have the arrhythmia than that. I wanted to close with these two thoughts and then have some quick time for questions. I had a patient with Parkinson's disease. It's one of my heroes. He came to our nursing home and he developed pneumonia because his swallowing reflexes has slowed down with his Parkinson's. And so he was choking on food. And he came back from his second or third pneumonia with a feeding tube in. And the doctors there had said it would help him to be able to get his nutrition more safely, and hadn't told him, and by the way, you'll never put food on your taste buds again. And he was asking me what to do about it. He was literally in tears at this point, not just the emotional ability of Parkinson's. Very, very sad about that. And I would be too. And it was Friday and I didn't have the hospital records. And I said, I'll put in a request. I'll see what the speech therapist found and let's see what we can come up with. It's a compromise. And Sunday I get a call from the nurse at the nursing home. His family had come in with some milk and some Chips Ahoy. And he was dunking them in milk and they were all soft and creamy. He was eating them and the family was watching him. And the nurse wanted to know if she should take them away. I said, oh, heck no. Let him enjoy them. And I went in and talked to him the next day. And he, by the way, miserably failed his swallow study. But this was his quality of life right now, was being able to enjoy that. And we worked out an agreement. Number one, we'd love to have someone there watching him. So his family wasn't there. A nurse would take 10 minutes to watch him have his milk and cookies. Number two, his family brought them in because the nursing home wanted to substitute, 1% milk and generic, cheapest cookies you can find. And the family said, oh no, we're bringing in every week a fresh gallon of whole milk and real Chips Ahoy. And he was the first patient I ever had that had a do not transfer order. Didn't want to be transferred to the hospital. If he got sick, we just managed the pneumonia with oxygen, a little morphine for the air hunger, whatever we could, oral antibiotics, we take some pills, but not sending him to the hospital. He didn't want x-rays or blood work. Just do the best you can for me in the nursing home. And we said, we'll do that. In the Northeast, about 40% of patients in nursing homes have do not transfer orders. In the South, it's less than 10%. Huge geographic difference in the way people are pushing towards that. The other thing that I learned is that we had patients in this Medicaring project back when I was at Kansas that had been bad lung patients. They'd been on the ventilator on average 4 times. And we, as part of our patient education, as we were trying to get them better informed, we had one of the ICU nurses there with a ventilator one day in this classroom we did our Medicaring clinic in. And she was showing the ventilator and she was talking about the pressure monitor. And if you try to, breathe out while the machine's pumping air in, the pressure goes way, way high and you can, puncture your lung and collapse your lung and you'd be dead very quickly. So, if that happens, then we paralyze you so that you can't, you won't try to breathe out while the machine's pumping air in. One patient said, "Did you paralyze me?" And I said, "I don't know. We paralyze about half our patients." He said, "I was itching all over and I couldn't scratch and I was miserable." And I said, "Yeah, that happens sometimes." And that session, several of our patients who'd been on the ventilator said, "If I get sick and I need the ventilator, because I've done well on the ventilator, but if you have to paralyze me, stop it." And, what a strange and obscure order, but it made perfect sense in this world of educated patients knowing what they're facing. You can put me on the ventilator, but if you have to paralyze me where I can't scratch my itches, stop it. Take the tube out, make it a comfortable death. And that's one of the things that we do in patient palliative care. The last thing I just wanted to share with you is a subject that came out of all places, the rigor of Hopkins, and this is soft science. Patients who'd been on the ventilator for a while, a few patients survived and they asked them, but mostly it was patients who didn't survive, and they talked to the families a month later. 4 things needed to be said at the end. I love you. I forgive you for all the times you ever thought you let me down. I'm sure if you could speak, you'd forgive me for all the times I was a lousy son, daughter, uncle, whatever. It's going to hurt for a while, but we're going to be okay after you're gone. Huge difference in the amount of suffering and guilt and angst of the family members if all 4 of those things got said. And the first 2 are easy. To actually say those last 2 things to the person. The last advice is keep that in your toolbox of things that you'll include at the end. And I'm sorry I skipped ahead, but I wanted to have, gosh, we're right. Thank you for your attention to this. Any questions? Greg.
Dr. Don, what are your thoughts on physician-assisted suicide in this time?
I have a horrible, horrible time with physician-assisted suicide. We'll talk about the slippery slope, and I would love to give you a 10-minute answer. Maybe I'll have to invite you back sometime. Talk with you outside of here, because it's not an easy and simple. In general, I think it's overused, over-discussed, and sorry for the.
Thanks, Dad. Thanks everyone for coming. And next week, we're going to have Dr. Meredith Riedel, a scholar of the history of Christianity. She's going to come back. She just did a whole thing about the devil. And she's going to come back and enlighten us with, what about angels? Thanks for coming.